Okay, welcome back to the Contrarians. Today we've got another topic voted on by our wonderful Patreon group, and that is favorite albums from legacy bands released in the 90s and 2000s. Now, as we were saying in some pre-recording chat here, that's a very ambiguously worded topic. So when you start, give us the definition of legacy band that you chose to do this thought exercise. It'll be interesting to see if we've all kind of used the same criteria, because I didn't look up anything extra as to what a legacy band is. I just went with my, pardon me, went with my own idea. So because there are so few of us, we're going to do one album at a time, wrap it up with some honorable mentions and general discussion. So I'm going to start with Dan. Dan, give us your first pick.
Okay, so first of all, regarding legacy bands, I chose, my rule, I guess, would be, they were active in the 70s all the way up until maybe still active, or maybe active until maybe 5-10 years ago. So I looked it up and I was like, because I was unsure what legacy bands was, and it's an older band, still active with the same type of following, like the same amount of fans as before. That's kind of what I got the gist of it. So my first pick will be, and I literally chose between 1990 and 2009 for me. First pick for me is from 1993, Rush Counterparts. It's what made me start buying Rush. I remember buying this at the time with my buddy, and I friggin' loved Animate. But it was the lead-off single that really confused us at the time, which was Stick It Out, which was, borderline grunge-ish, to a point there. But there's a lot of great tracks here. Nobody's Hero is a great, great song. Cut to the Chase, Alien Shore, Speed, the whole thing is great here for me. Didn't get to see this tour. I saw the next one after that. But yeah, I'm going to go with Rush Counterparts from 1993. Pretty much what started getting me collecting them on CD at the time. So there you go, Rush Counterparts.
Okay, very good. Well, certainly Rush would count as a legacy band. I think that's a solid pick. So, David, give us your definition of a legacy band that you used in your first pick.
Yeah, I think that, I didn't look anything up. I didn't do any research, but I think, legacy band to me, I tried to just impose some criteria, right? The band that, maybe started, 60s, 70s, maybe into the early 80s. Any band that sort of started later than that, I sort of started to exclude because it was sort of early. If they weren't 10 years old or more by the time we get into the 90s, they're probably, in my mind, maybe not legacy enough for the purposes of this conversation. And it really wasn't too much of an issue because there's so much to work with, right? I mean, this is a pretty broad topic, and so it was cool. And it was interesting because digging into this, which is kind of cool about a lot of the topics that we tackle here on Contrarians, is that you uncover things, and you get a really chance to, even though you live through it with the bands, you may have the whole catalog, you start to see sort of this evolution of the band navigating different times, especially a band that's been around a long time, like my first pick, which is the Scorpions. This is a band that started in 1970, in the late 60s, right? And, you go through that whole era, the Uli Roth era in the 70s, and they've tackled everything except America. And then you've got the 80s Scorpions, where they kind of become they tackle America and become almost a hard rock metal band, right? And to some people weren't even aware, me included, for a long time, just because of my point of entry. I wasn't even aware of a lot of that early era Scorpions until later. I'm like, oh, is Blackout their first record, and is this a new band? And so, like a lot of bands, when you get into the 90s and things are changing quickly, negatively for certainly the hard rock and the metal bands. And, and the Scorpions, and some bands, navigated it differently. Some stayed the course, kind of true to their sound. Some tried to do different things and adapt with varying levels of success. And some of that's subjective, you know. But I think the Scorpions were one that sort of tripped over themselves a little bit, right? So they, you know, ever since the sort of the crazy world and the wind of change was sort of their peak, and then in 1990 and everything starts to decline for them sort of after that. Their follow-up, Face the Heat, doesn't do that well. That was their last major label record with Mercury, and then they stumble through, you know, smaller labels, you know, the Pure Instinct record, which was odd. It was very ballad heavy. And then sort of the weirdness culminates with Eye to Eye, which is a real outlier in the catalog, right? It's very artsy, it's dark, there's a lot of weird instrumentation that's not, you know, Scorpions, you know, that they haven't used in the past. There's drum triggers and pads, and, you know, it's just different, you know, and it's an outlier. Some people like it. I don't hate it. There's a lot I like about it, but again, if you listen to Eye, you know, it's very much an outlier. So they're really stumbling around by 1999 with Eye, and I think a lot of the Scorpions fans have gotten off the train, so to speak. And so when 2004 rolls around and they release Unbreakable, which is my choice, Unbreakable, I think a lot of Scorpions fans are off the train by here. And so I think this album by and large goes unnoticed. And probably also time in terms of what was popular in 04, but really Unbreakable is a return to form. It's heavy, it's melodic. I mean, it's everything that you want to hear about with the Scorpions. The songs are fantastic. You know, they sort of rid themselves of the demons of the 90s and really come back true to form. So for those maybe that haven't checked it out, you know, and got off the Scorpions train somewhere after Crazy World, you know, and you want to get back into what they were doing, I would start here with the Unbreakable record. So really a great comeback for them. That's my first choice.
Okay, very good. You know, maybe one of these days, Contrarians will do a video on our favorite band that announced their retirement and then didn't retire. Because I think I went to the Scorpions retirement tour in 2012.
I did too.
So, yeah. All right. Well, for my own personal definition of legacy band, I was just looking at a band that had at least a 20-year career and is still putting out albums or touring. And for 90s and 2000s, I used every year in the 2000s. So basically, you know, it's 34 years now of music there. And in fact, my first pick actually came out in 2010. And I'm going to start off with Accept, Blood of the Nations. Now, as a younger metal fan, I was not an enormous Accept fan. I liked Accept. They were just meat and potatoes, everyman heavy metal. They had great riffs. You know, they had some wonky lyrics from time to time. That you get that a lot with English as a second language bands. I was not particularly a fan of Udo's voice. I'm still not particularly a fan of Udo's voice. It's okay. But, you know, I liked the Rob Halfords and the Bruce Dickinsons and the Ronnie Dios and the guys that had these real, you know, powerful operatic pipes. And Udo is kind of the antithesis of that. So then they came out with those weird black, I call them the black albums, probably Black and White, Black and Red, the albums like a Death Row that came out during grunge. And those are interesting, but you know, I wasn't really sad that we didn't hear from Accept for a while. And then all of a sudden in 2010, they just rise like a phoenix from the ashes. They put out this fantastic album. I happened to see them live at Prague Power in 2010. So that coincided with this album release. And it sounds like it's 1985 again. I mean, it's very rare for people to pick up the torch 30 years later and still sound more or less the same. And of course, Wolf Hoffman says the reason that kind of works out that way, sorry, my hair's blowing around all day. Sometimes they're like that. The reason it's like that is because the producer, Andy Sneap, had them sit down and listen to all their old albums. and say, this is what I like about this. This is what I like about this. So it puts you back into that mindset. But it's right back where they were with Mark Tornillo on vocals. He's a little too close to Udo. I actually would have preferred they went with a slightly different direction. Obviously, they couldn't go way off the beaten track, but it still has great riffs. It's got great lyrics. They were really good and energetic live, and it was a great experience. Now, I will still say, for me, Accept remains the everyman meat and potatoes heavy metal band. I like every album that they've put out since. I don't necessarily love every one of them. I've seen them live 3 times, possibly 4. The years kind of blur together. But, consistently good. But for some reason, I'd never noticed just how gory this album cover is. So that's a real statement. Although since I didn't really pay attention to it, probably most people didn't have the impact that they thought it would. But nonetheless, Accept Blood of the Nations, it was a fantastic comeback album. Their career's been going strong ever since. And with a band like that, as with many legacy acts, there's no sign of them stopping. We'll talk about that more in a bit. In the meantime, Dan, move on to selection 2, please.
I almost chose that one too, but because of my rule stopping at 2009, Teutonic Terror, when I first saw that, I was like that song is wow. So good choice. All right, my next one, band that started, I think their first album is 1979, and they're still going on strong right now. This one album is from 1997. Back in the 80s, they were ridiculed big time by the metal community, but right now they're making their arguably their best music ever. So I'm going to go with Saxon, and this Unleash the Beast. And the reason I chose this one here, I mean, I liked Saxon back then. I do like their glam or hair metal era too. But it was this album that actually made me buy the whole collection. Because I don't know about where you guys are from, but this was like a dead band, all the albums before that. And I remember my friend coming to work one time, was like, Dan, have you heard the new Saxon? And I was like, Saxon? Like, they're like, no. And he's like, he lends me the tape, and I came back the next day and I was like, wow, that is great stuff. And to me, this marks the beginning of their second life, I guess, there. And I mean, I wouldn't say like their music is kind of going like this, but it's kind of like been like this here. They're great. It's just not, there's never that super wow moment like Motorcycle Man or anything on this here, but still great stuff. But yeah, talk about getting your second lease on life. And they actually went on a couple of albums after this. They went on a British TV show, try to get their career back on track. And it took a few albums, but now like they're headlining Wacken or whatnot there. I saw them on here in Canada for my only time I got to see them. For the Firepower tour for Judas Priest, they were openers, and I was like, wow, these guys. And my friend even texted me after like the show, was like, those guys were good. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Saxon, Unleash the Beast from 1997. What got me, I got the whole collection after that and continued on just because of this album here. So there you
go. Okay, good pick. Yeah, I recently watched a video. I think it's Hellfest released a whole series of concert videos, and I watched the Saxon performance. Still good stuff. And now they have Brian Tatler from Diamond Head is playing the Saxon. And I thought, well, that's interesting. All right, David, give us your second pick, please.
Okay, number 2. So I cheat my rule a little bit because I love the band so much, and it's obviously their first record doesn't come out until 1988, but I mean obviously their history goes well before that. So I cheat a little bit when I think legacy, but in the band is L.A. Guns, and L.A. Guns is interesting, right? So L.A. Guns in '88, and they have, a good run of like three pretty strong records. Kind of don't get next level. Always sort of connected to Guns N' Roses for all the reasons everybody already knows, right? And so they kind of do well, have some gold and platinum records, but don't ever get sort of headliner arena level. And then by the early '90s, there's turmoil in the band. Tracy's one of my favorite guitar players, but also he's a guy that likes to, like shiny objects. He likes to go to the new thing. He doesn't want to gets bored, I think, pretty easily, and likes to try new things musically. And I think when things went south, sort of after the Vampires, the record that followed that sort of tanked. It was a little more industrial, a little heavier, and then there was turmoil, and Phil Lewis leaves the band, and they kind of struggle for most of the '90s with just disjointed releases that really don't sound like LA Guns, and in 2001, they signed with a label called Spitfire, and they put out a record called Man the Moon. Phil comes back, and now you get the Phil and Tracy thing, and you got the sound of the guitar and Phil, which is really the magic of LA Guns, right? The two of them together. And they put out the Man the Moon record, which is a really good record, but it's 2001 and it's Spitfire and nobody probably hears it. And then they follow that up with an album called Waking the Dead, which is my choice. So Waking the Dead, this was re-released, first time on vinyl in 2022 Record Store Day. Kind of cool blue splattery thing. But this, obviously a 2002 release, was never pressed on vinyl at the time. So, it's as classic as LA Guns. While the Man the Moon album is really good, this sort of kind of is just a touch better, right? It's everything. If you like LA Guns, classic LA Guns, the Waking the Dead record is, I think, really the record that was going to get them back on track. But falls to the wayside because they record the record and Tracy decides he wants to do a band with Nikki Sixx called Brides of Destruction, and he leaves LA Guns right after they record this, and so now there's no guitar player. And so this album really goes nowhere. And I think Tracy and Phil are angry. Phil's angry at Tracy for the next umpteen years until they reunite for the Missing Piece record, a few years ago. But I think, far as releases, I think this really is a wonderful record, really a classic LA Guns record that sort of falls between the cracks for the reasons I just mentioned. So my second pick is LA Guns 2002's Waking the Dead.
Now that sounds like a microcosm of early 21st century rock and roll band problems right there. Okay. Well, my next pick, a bit of a contrarian pick, no doubt, but I went with Alice Cooper. This is a double CD, but it's got Brutal Planet and Dragon Town. Now, I know Brutal Planet is not a lot of people's favorite Alice Cooper album, but I love it. Alice Cooper, obviously a artist that's famous for changing things around through his career. They will argue, I should say the Alice Cooper band will argue that they were the original glam band and that the various glam acts, took their look from the Alice Cooper band. Literally everybody who's not them disputes that. But nonetheless, after that, you have Alice's solo career. He's trying album rock, he's trying new wave, and then he tries a couple of hair metal albums. I happen to love those albums with Kane Roberts. Kane is a really creative guitar player. I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for those two albums. And then he has his sellout, I Just Want to Make Money Now phase, and he puts out 2 platinum albums, which are I don't hold them in particularly high regard, honestly. I think Hey Stupid is a terrible album. And then, again, having his career resurgence, now here comes the 90s, and he's at sea again, not knowing what to do. And in 2001, sorry about this, I did not write down the release. Straight up 2000, he releases an industrial album, which nobody anticipated. but I love it specifically because of that. I like industrial music. I like a lot of industrial bands, not all of them. Some industrial is terrible, just like every genre of music. But I like a lot of industrial, this Mortal Coil and KMFDM, the Revolting Cocks, Ministry. And it's a lot more Nine Inch Nails than Ministry, but nonetheless, it's good. It's heavy. It's aggressive. It's got really good lyrics. And he came to our town. I was living in Oklahoma City at the time. Oklahoma City has a regional theme park that was owned by the Six Flags Corporation. And Alice Cooper had a deal with Six Flags to put on themed haunted houses. So they had the Brutal Planet haunted house. And I tell the story. It was one of the worst theme park experiences I ever had. The line to get into his haunted house was 4 hours long. And you're in this line. All you can see is this building with a strobe light, and you can hear thumping bass. So when you get close enough, you realize they're playing the song Brutal Planet over and over and over again. And inside you go in, of course, it's a theme park. So you're wandering around and around. And in this building, it's just blaring this really loud music with a strobe light going, and then women in like light bondage gear dancing on a stage to the song Brutal Planet. Well, it took an hour to get through that building. And that wasn't even the haunted house. That was still just line, an hour of being bombarded with that song. And then it took an hour from there to get to the actual haunted house. And I think the haunted house took 15 minutes to walk through. So nonetheless, all of that aside, I still like the album, even if I was not overly impressed by his haunted house. So, but it is very different. It's not like anything else in the Alice Cooper catalog. But this is also kind of a stand-in for me of the entirety of Alice's output in the 21st century. I like all of his albums. They're not all, insta classics, but they've all got great songs on them. I don't think, at least now that he's sober, Alice has ever turned in a truly bad performance. And that goes right up to just last year. He came out with The Road. Mm-hmm. Is that this year? No, I'm sure that was last year.
Last year, yeah.
Yeah, and, that's a great album. Well, great, maybe a little. It's a good album. I wouldn't say it was one of my favorites of the year, but I enjoy listening to it. So, Alice Cooper, Brutal Planet. I know a lot of Alice Cooper fans are, well, I like it. And with that, we're going to go back to Dan. Dan, what's your third pick?
All right. Well, I may be one of those Alice Cooper fans because my next pick is an Alice Cooper album, actually. I liked Brutal Planet and Dragon Town when they came out. To me, I just don't find they aged well. Brutal Planet is a lot better than Dragon Town for me there. The Little Things, that's such a great song. Cold Machines is the last song of the album. There's some great stuff on that. But I remember, it was good for that time, because I saw the Dragon Town tour in Hamilton a few hours here, and it probably was my least favorite Alice Cooper live. So when he came announcing, and you're right, Ree, he hasn't done anything bad in a long time there. I love it for what it is. To me, it just didn't age well as much. But then he announced his new album, which is my next pick, and I'm going to go with The Eyes of Alice Cooper. And I remember still to the day what I was doing when I heard Novocaine, which was the lead off, or I guess the internet was sort of new back then, but it was pretty much one of the first songs you were able to check. I was like, wow, this is what I like. And I think I saw this tour twice, maybe. What do you want? I mean, sure, the lyrics are a little bit dated when he's talking about Xbox and blah, blah, blah. But Man of the Year isn't the lyrics. I friggin' love the song, love the lyrics. What do you want from me? Between high school and old school, Man of the Year, Novocaine, Bye Bye Baby's got it. I love it when he adds little trumpets and stuff like that there. Backyard Brawl, This House is Haunted. The song that didn't rhyme has got to be borderline annoying and brilliant at the same time. My only beef with this one is the song Detroit City. Why do you bother re-recording it for a second and third time, if I'm counting myself, the versions he's done there? But yeah, I remember, like, to me, this was a breath of fresh air after the Dragon Town and Brutal Planet there. Like I said, it was good for what at the time, but for me, this is what I like about Alice Cooper. So yeah, The Eyes of Alice Cooper from 2003 is my next pick.
Okay. Very good.
Sorry, Reed.
No, it's cool. I completely understand why so many Alice Cooper fans don't like Brutal Planet, but there is
I don't hate it.
Yeah,
I don't hate it.
There's a lot of crossover between heavy metal and industrial, but much less so. I think you have to be a specific vintage of metal fan to really get into that crossover.
Mm-hmm.
All right, David, what is your next pick?
Okay, so my next pick, so I intentionally tried to deviate a little bit from some of the hard rock and metal, because if anybody's seen me on here, they know where my foundation is, and sort of based on my first two, I certainly could talk about bands in that ilk for the next, endlessly. So I tried to purposely look at some other bands that I enjoy in maybe some other genres that, were doing some good stuff in the 90s. And an album that I really do enjoy is Pink Floyd's Division Bell. And, it's obviously a legacy band, by any definition, probably. We get into sort of the non-Roger Waters era, which I know is divisive among Pink Floyd fans. For me and my timeline, getting into Pink Floyd and, kind of in, my high school years, which is sort of momentary lapse of reason. So easier palette for me to accept a Roger Waters list Pink Floyd. I certainly, enjoyed the momentary lapse of reason record and the follow-up Division Bell. So while there's no Roger Waters, I do enjoy this era of Pink Floyd. I sort of lean toward that. I'm a big fan of David Gilmour. Like Tracy Guns, David is one of my favorite guitar players, stylistically, and to listen to. I think it's fantastic. I think the new David Gilmour solo record is awesome. So cheap plug there. If you haven't picked that up if you're a fan of Gilmour, check out the new record. It's wonderful. But my third pick is Division Bell, which I think, other than the Endless River, sort of stands as the last Pink Floyd record, which will probably end up being the last Pink Floyd record. So really of new material. So I know the Endless River is in there, which is great, sort of compilation, a lot of instrumental stuff, but some of it dates back to the Division Bell era. But, I think that's, a wonderful record that, and Qualify certainly comes out in 94. So the purposes of the discussion, legacy band, 90s record. So, my pick is Pink Floyd Division Bell number 3.
Okay, very good. Now, I remember I was in college when Momentary Lapse of Reason came out, and there was somebody playing that at the dorms like 24/7. It was funny. At my college, they were either playing Boston or Momentary Lapse of Reason. But no one really was into the Division Bell when it came out. Everyone loved the live albums like Delicate Sound of Thunder and Pulse. But you didn't hear a lot of love for that album for whatever reason. Okay, I am moving on to my third pick. And this is no surprise to anybody who has seen me do any of the numerous Black Sabbath shows here on the channel. But I had to go with Dehumanizer, including two of my favorite things, Tony Iommi on guitar and Ronnie Dio on vocals. Although this is my least favorite of the Dio-based Black Sabbath albums, nonetheless, it is a killer album. It is brutally heavy. It's one of the heaviest things that Black Sabbath ever recorded. My real knock against it is the production. It's very harsh. I know Pete Jones says that it's got basically an infinite level production, so you can turn it up and it never sounds worse at any particular volume. And I'm like, yeah, but we sacrifice that is everything else. Nonetheless, it's got a lot of great songs. It's got a lot of amazing riffs. And I love how out of touch that it was with modern music. There are no nods to grunge on this. There are no nods to alternative. It is just straight up in your face heavy metal, and one of the highest profile of the legacy heavy metal bands. Now, as anybody will tell you, I used to have this argument with people all the time. There was a lot of great heavy metal coming out in the 90s, even when people were saying that grunge had killed heavy metal. There was a ton of heavy metal coming out, but you had to look for it. It was just harder to find information on it. It was mostly smaller European bands, like Halloween was becoming the biggest power metal band in the world. I love Halloween. But in terms of just a legacy heavy metal act, Black Sabbath was the flag wavers, the flag carriers, and this was the album that carried on the legacy. Of course, then you get into their whole weirdness with Tony Martin, who they threw out of the band, and then after Dio left, they got him back. Black Sabbath's the band that entertains on multiple levels. But nonetheless, this is a great album. Well, I can't imagine any Sabbath fan doesn't already have it, but if you're not familiar with it, it is one of the heaviest things that Sabbath ever put out, and it deserves a spin. All right, Dan, number 4.
I actually bought the Wayne's World soundtrack, if you remember, with the
Time Machine
pre-release version. I love that song, by the way, so good choice. Yeah. All right, my next one is from 2009. So this band has been around since 73, if I got my dates correctly here. Probably the most gimmicky band out there. I could probably see, you're probably guessing who I'm talking about right now, but I'm going to go with Kiss Sonic Boom. No, this is not an official press here, if you're wondering. After Carnival of Souls, love it or hate it, whatever. Psycho Circus, a little bit disappointing for this year, but when this came out, I was like, wow, like talk about, like Kiss is my favorite band, and this sounded so fresh. I know some people were like, because of this guy and this guy with stealing the makeup and all that. I'm like, I'm 52, I don't care about this stuff anymore. Like to me, it's just about the music, and it's just like banger. I mean, there's 2 songs near the end where I'm like, they're good, but all these songs, like I was like, wow, these are all bangers here. Like I remember seeing Modern Day Delilah for the first time. I was like, wow. And we actually went. I'm in Canada, Ontario, and we actually went to Detroit. So it was the Alive 35 tour, and we went to Detroit to Cobo Hall, because they were supposedly destroying it. So it was like Kiss's last, and they played Modern Day Delilah there live for the first time. And part of the video was filmed there, because if you see the video for Modern Day Delilah, when Paul Stanley smacks his mic stand on the, because it wasn't working, I was there. I can vouch for that. That actually happened. His mic stand, when he goes on the, whatever you want to call that, zip line there to go sing right. For Loving You, his mic wasn't working, so he had to go back and whatever. But anyway, I'm going to go with Kiss Sonic Boom from 2009. Monster is about as good, maybe a little less. You know what? I think they're equal. They're great, solid albums. No ballads. This is just rock song after rock song. Some great, some good. I don't think there's a bad song on this year. Yeah, I'm going to go with Kiss Sonic Boom.
Okay. And if anybody watching hasn't seen it, the Contrarians did an episode where we fight out Sonic Boom and Monster. So search for that on the channel. That was a pretty fun panel, too. I think Kiss really shot themselves in the foot with the marketing on Sonic Boom. It was so cheesy and over the top that people maybe didn't give that album a chance.
The Walmart thing there?
Yeah, it was exclusive at Walmart, and they were supposed to have all of this different merchandise, and in the end, what they had were M&Ms with little stencils of Kiss faces on them.
We didn't have the M&Ms. I remember buying those M&Ms off of eBay, and of course I ate them all. But
we used to have a joke. I bet he's rich enough that he ate his Kiss M&Ms.
I was just hungry. I'm not rich. But yeah, I remember the Walmart thing, and there was in Canada there was the CD, which was you know what, price wise and what was on it was actually very worthwhile. It was $12, and now you had a concert, a recording of Greatest Hits and Sonic Boom.
Yeah.
But that was it, though.
No, I agree. I like that album. All right, David, number 4.
Number 4, yeah, I Sonic Boom almost made it into my list. It was probably kind of in the honorable mention category. I was obviously, Kiss is my favorite band also, and Sonic Boom I prefer Sonic Boom over Monster personally. I think they're both pretty good, but I think Monster is a little more brick walled in terms of production. It's hard to listen to sometimes, and I think both of those records probably would have done a little bit better with some outside production. I'm a big Paul Stanley guy, but I'm not sure that production was as good as it could have been on either of those. But I think Sonic, just to echo, I think Sonic Boom's really was a nice comeback for them after not having any real, new original material for a long time. So, pivoting, I'm gonna, go stray away from my metal roots for one more time before we get back into the good music. And I'm gonna go with another legacy band that's been through a lot of changes and eras. And I'm going to go Fleetwood Mac. And Fleetwood Mac, a band I like, another guitar player who I like quite a bit, Lindsey Buckingham. So the 2003 Say You Will record. So it was sort of, I think it still stands as their last, proper studio record, and probably will be. Lindsey hadn't been in the band since Tango in the Night, 1987. So it's been some time since you had sort of a proper Fleetwood Mac record. There was a couple records in there, one even without Stevie Nicks. I don't think they had anything since the Time record in 95, and I'm not sure Stevie Nicks was on that record. I think that was the one where they didn't have either of them, right? And so, the Say You Will record, I'll say that I think there's a lot of really good material on there. I think, if there's a sort of a negative side to it, I think it feels a little bit disjointed to me, not as cohesive. Obviously, in Fleetwood Mac, to me, they've always had multiple writers. I mean, Stevie writes her songs, Lindsey writes songs, Christine writes songs. They bring them in, but I think and in the past, even like Tango in the Night, even though there's distinctly Stevie songs and Lindsey songs and whatnot, there still felt like a cohesiveness to the record. Like someone brings in a song, and there's still some collaboration that goes on, and sort of everybody adds their own little spice to the recipe, so to speak. Say You Will feels like the individual is bringing in almost completed songs, and everybody's sort of just being the backup band for that person's song. And so for that reason, it feels to me a little disjointed or a little not as cohesive as it could be. The songs individually are all really fantastic, most of them. And I think part of that also comes from the fact that I think a lot of the material was really originally slated to be a Lindsey Buckingham solo record. And then when there was this, hey, let's do a Fleetwood Mac record, he had this material that was sort of already lined up to be solo material. So it was, I think, by and large completed. And I think the rest of the band, my sense is, just as a listener, it doesn't have as much collaboration, even, just adding a little spice here and there to make it, sort of a Fleetwood Mac song versus, hey, this could be on a Lindsey solo record or a Stevie solo record or whatever. So I think the upside is it's really fantastic album. You get all the, Lindsey's get all the elements of Fleetwood Mac from, John and Mick in the rhythm section and the voices melding as they do, and Lindsey's guitar. You've got all of that. All those elements are there, which is why it makes my list. But I think if there's a downside, I think it's just not as cohesive as some of the albums in the past, for the reasons I stated. But I think overall, it's a worthy record from a legacy band. It might be a tad long. It feels like there might have been a few songs that could have not made the record, maybe that were borderline. I think they just put everything on there. I think in the CD era, if you've got 80 minutes, you use 80 minutes. And I don't know if you always need all 80 minutes, but I mean, it is on vinyl now. It's a double vinyl, so they didn't shove all of that into one vinyl, but or one record, so it is double. So this Say You Will has been released on vinyl now, so it's available. an album I like a lot. So number four for me, yes, Fleetwood Mac, Say You Will, 2003.
Okay. All right. Well, sticking in some fairly obvious waters for me, I have gone to Blue Oyster Cult's Heaven Forbid. Blue Oyster Cult has always been not as heavy as many people think they are. They get lumped in with a heavy metal band, even though they rarely were heavy. But this is a very heavy album. Having said that, it's a very modern sounding album. It came out in 2009. Although if I understand the story correctly, and I am not an obsessive Blue Oyster Cult trivia guy, so I may be misremembering, but many of the songs had existed years earlier, but had just never been put onto an album. But by the time they put them down on album, I think this is the best Blue Oyster Cult ever sounded. Now they're counterculture lyricists from the 70s were all gone, so they were using a new lyricist, a science fiction author whose name escapes me. I was trying to look it up earlier and I couldn't do it quiet and unobtrusive enough to look it up. But some of the lyrics are really great. Some of them maybe not so great, but the songs all sound like $1,000,000. The material comes off great live. I've seen them live after this. And it has Harvest Moon, which is a late career stone cold classic that includes, that kind of Don't Fear the Reaperish sort of melody and kind of lightness to it, and yet this incredibly creepy subject matter about how all the teens are disappearing and they find them the next winter after the thaw. They find them the next spring. So great sleeper track there that's like an American Gothic horror story, which is something that they were quite good at doing. And it's got songs like Power Underneath Despair, which is a real driving song. And I think if this had come out like 87, 88, it would have been massive. But by 2009, their market was greatly diminished, and I just don't think it was getting a lot of eyeballs on it. But if you've never listened to it, this is one of my easy top 3 Blue Oyster Cult albums. So highly recommend it. All right. Number 5, and then after we give our last pick, we'll go around and we'll do some honorable mentions and a little general discussion. I think we can still come in on time here. We may go over just a little bit, which is fine.
Good pick, by the way. I like that album. Okay, this, my first pick, or number 1, whatever, was, I guess at that time, this is from 1996. This band was considered old by that time, and I remember 2 things. One, I forget which magazine it was, but it was the best album you'll never hear, because we all know what happened to metal and hard rock bands. You can make the best album ever, nobody's gonna buy it because it wasn't the in thing. So I still remember the headline is the best album you'll never hear, and I was at the store and I heard a song, and it was I'm Not Your Lover, which is Deep Purple, Perpendicular. I absolutely love this album. I'm not afraid to say it that this is my favorite Deep Purple album. Is fresh. I think sometimes I feel like Screaming is probably one of the best, easily for me, one of the top 10 best songs ever. I love the structure of it, the guitar from Steve Morse on this. And I still remember like giggling at the time when you look inside and you see them all with, John Lord with the beard like myself, but looking even older and doing these on the keyboard. I'm like, oh my God, the guy looks like he has arthritis in the picture. But oh my, like this is one of, and of course this actually made me go and buy everything else. But Cascades, I'm Not Your Lover. Sometimes I feel like Screaming. Somebody Stole My Guitar. You know what? The whole album is, I just absolutely love this one here. And it was sort of like the start of them not making a dud. Well, I guess ignore Bananas if you know, you know, I guess there. I don't mind it there, but yeah, I don't find that they've made a dud ever since. They haven't made a dud at all, to be honest there. They were just considered old. When was it the one with the dragon there? I forget what the name is there. But
The Battle Rages On.
That's it. Yeah, Battle Rages On.
Yeah.
Whether like I didn't pay attention to them as much, but I just remember being at the store, hearing that one song on the speaker, and I was like, oh my god, what is that? And it was the new Deep Purple, and it wasn't like your chain record store. It was one of those independents that did imports and all these rarities, and like I love that store. It doesn't exist anymore there, but yeah. So yeah, 1996 Perpendicular from Deep Purple has my vote for my favorite Deep Purple album and my number one on this list.
Okay. I mean, other than the fact that I happen to love Bananas, I'm completely with you on Perpendicular. That's a great album.
I like Bananas. Other people don't.
Yeah, although I frequently say Abandon is my favorite of the Steve Morse era albums. So, David, give us your final pick, please.
All right, I'm going to return to our regularly scheduled metal and hard rock / metal. I'm going to go with a band that had its start in first record anyway, comes out in 1984 and has a good bit of success toward the late 90s with a lot of the hard rock and heavy metal music that was going on at the time. And like many bands, you know, that were sort of Midland, you know, like an LA Guns level band, fell off the cliff, you know, in the early 90s, couldn't get arrested, right? And so the band is Great White, and maybe, you know, in trying to find this fifth pick, you know, I've got some honorable mentions, but maybe, you know, just a tip of the hat to Jack Russell, who we recently lost, one of the great vocalists of our time, you know, to me. And so wanted to mention, you know, sort of Great White. And I think, you know, Great White, as they get into the 90s, sort of fall off the cliff fast, like a lot of bands, right? That didn't have, unless your name is Bon Jovi or Def Leppard, and you can kind of stumble through the decade. The 90s was a real ugly decade. Even the Scorpions, as we talked about, stumbled through most of that decade. But, you know, so, you know, lose your major label deal and you're on the side label, and they've kind of stumbled. But the interesting thing about Great White is they never did a record that sounded, grunge or industrial. They didn't try to pivot. I mean, everything is pretty consistent. So where like a band like the Scorpions, you know, tries different things and they do eye to eye, and not one is better than the other. But then, you know, Rita just mentioned, you know, some bands stayed the course, and this is who we are. This is what we're going to do. And if it sells 5 copies, it sells 5 copies. This is what we do, you know. And some other bands were like, oh shit, we need a hit. You know, let's sound more like that, or let's do a grunge tinged record, or let's try to do that. And they're chasing trends a bit, and with varying degrees of success, mostly not so much, right? So, you know, they, as they get into the mid 90s, you know, they're on smaller labels, but they're still putting out music that sounds like Great White. You know, Let It Rock comes out in 96, and then, which I think was on Portrait, which I think was Kolodner's short-lived out record label. And then in 1999, they put out this one, which is my pick, Can't Get There From Here. And I think this is one of the best records that they put out. Got a little bit of a glare, I apologize.
Hey, it's Infinite Me.
It's you know, one of the best records. It comes out in 99, so just before the turn. I think, you know, it's classic Great White. It's bluesy. It's the Kendall guitar and it's Jack's vocals. I think what sets this album just a little bit better than maybe the one that came before it or the one that came after it was production and songwriting. And I think a lot of that is sort of the tip of the hat to Jack Blades from Night Ranger. Jack produces this and helps with some of the songs. And so I think, you know, the catchiness and the sort of the songwriting is just a little, just a tad better than the albums that sit around it. And I, you know, kind of attribute that to the Jack Blades influence. So, this is a strong collection of songs. I think that for those that haven't sought it out, I would do so. I mean, it's not on a very strong label. I think this one also was on Portrait, so I think they did a couple for Kalodner's label, but didn't have high distribution. But I think if you're looking for something, the Great White, that maybe you haven't heard before, and you're looking at the catalog and you say, what should I grab? Try to find yourself a copy of this. Can't Get There From Here. Maybe it'll get a release at some point on vinyl. I'm not sure, but there's just from Freedom Song to In the Tradition, Wooden Jesus. I mean, this album is all Great White. Everything. If you like Great White, this is it. So that's my last pick. Great White's Can't Get There From Here, 1999.
Is that with Rolling Stoned?
Rolling Stoned is on here. It's the first track, and I think it was the single.
That was a
as well.
Here. And I use the term loosely there. I mean, we have a top 30 of a radio station that was probably like number 28 or 29. But I remember seeing it in the paper that was a minor hit here, Rolling Stoned.
Huh.
Yeah, a big Great White fan, and I remember seeing them. They were playing clubs, at least here, and I'm in California, and in that era, and it was sad in a way. I mean, it was half full clubs, and at that time. So, but yeah, phenomenal record. I'm glad I had a little bit of success in the Great White North there.
Okay. Well, for my last pick, I'm going back to the 1990s. Now, this artist is a legacy artist in every sense of the word, unlike some of the other artists we've mentioned. This guy never took a hiatus from 1968 until more or less 2003. He was constantly putting out new projects. He changed sound every 2 or 3 albums. And he, like a lot of guys, was kind of flailing around in the 90s. But I'm going to go with David Bowie in the album Outside. Very much a product of its time. It almost like Brutal Planet. It's almost light industrial, although it's really more industrial in feel than it is in music. But there are elements of electronica and industrial music, and it's very, very strange. And he intended it as the first of a trilogy because it's got this weird little nonsensical story. The videos he made for the songs, I think, are absolutely fabulous. He looked completely different. In the 90s, he had that little, what do you call that, a soul patch? He had that little, strip beard on his chin, and he was wearing the long jackets. So very visual. He was touring with 9 Inch Nails. But definitely a guy who not only tried to stay relevant, but actually stayed relevant. And by relevant, I mean that there were younger people buying his albums. And I will contrast that with a legacy artist like Deep Purple. I saw Deep Purple in concert just a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, on Ian Gillan's 79th birthday. And I was one of the younger people in the audience. It was not a multi-generational crowd. Now, there were a few people, that clearly it was people bringing their kids, with their kids being in their 20s. But for the most part, it was middle-aged people and up that were there to watch them. But David Bowie maintained a pretty consistent ability to get new fans. And certainly Outside was absolutely nothing like, the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Or very intentionally, it was nothing like Let's Dance or his 80s output. It was about as uncommercial as he was ever going to do. And it was an album where he finally went, you know what, I sold out, I made a lot of money. I don't think that's a like, yeah, he got ripped off as like so many artists. He just didn't know anything about business. He, you know what, doggone it, it's time I made some money, and he put out Let's Dance.
I think you're a little choppy.
All right, here, just a second. I'm going to pause this.
Just wondering if it was just me or...
No, that was definitely me. Sorry. Note to the editor, you may want to edit that bit out. Very, very much apologize. Anyway, One Outside, very different, intentionally very different than anything Bowie did. The lyrics are very weird. The story's very weird. He's got this concept about a private investigator who investigates whether the murder of this young girl was a form of art. So David Bowie was a strange man, and he made strange music at times, but I actually really like that. I like the experimental nature of the album, and it gave me a lifelong appreciation, actually, of Reeves Gabrels, who's one of my favorite guitarists because he's so unusual. All right, so we're towards the end of the video. Let's do couple of honorable mentions, and then I have some wrap-up thoughts, and we'll call it a video. So, Dan, give us your honorable mentions.
You want the both of them now, or one at a time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just give them all.
I'm just gonna, Crazy World, Scorpions on like 1990. This probably was my second or third concert ever. So I saw this. Anyway, I'm not gonna talk about too much there. And decent. Not great, but, decent. And I'm probably one of the only people on earth that actually enjoys Loch Ness musically. Not lyrically, but musically. So these are my two honorable mentions right here. Crazy World from 1990, Angel of Retribution from 2005.
Right. I still can't believe they did Loch Ness live on the Angel of Retribution tour. That was, that was an interesting choice.
They did not play it in my town, I can tell you that.
All right, David, honorable mentions?
Yeah, a couple, both bands sort of different trajectories, but both started in the early 80s. One of them being Europe. Europe, at least in the United States, feels like, to most a one-hit wonder. They're the Final Countdown guys. But this is a band that has quite a remarkable catalog, if I might say. And I think, they were gone for 13 years, and the members did from 91 to 2004, I think. And then, they did Start for the Dark, and they come back with the original lineup with John Norum. And since that time, they've had half a dozen albums that are phenomenal. They're heavier, they're darker, but it's still melodic, and you got the original lineup there, the classic lineup. And so I picked their second sort of reunion record called Secret Society. So there's Start from the Dark, and then this one was the follow-up. But you can't go wrong with anything that they've done since. Their second act, arguably, and I'm a big fan of the first act, but I think the second act is as good, if not better, than the second act. And my other honorable mention was a band that sort of continued to make music sporadically, started in the early 80s, but I'm going to go with Fate's Warning, and I'm going to select Disconnected. I could select any number of records from the 90s and 2000s. There's 3 records in there or so that are really phenomenal in their own right. Everybody will probably rank them differently. I went with Disconnected. It just had a 20th anniversary release on vinyl. So if anyone's looking for this copy, you can get it re-released on colored vinyl, depending on your region, and CD. So Fate's Warning, Disconnected, and Europe Secret Society were my honorable mentions.
Okay. Well, anybody who is paying attention, and if you were, bless you, sir. Thank you for watching the show. Sir or madam, I should say. But this is how I went about picking my albums. I just went through my CD collection, standing there on the wall, started at the front. Okay, there's Accept. There's Alice Cooper. Yes, I haven't filed under A. And you'll notice I didn't get any further than B. And I realized what legacy bands that I love in the 90s and 2000s, all of them. Everybody was putting out freaking great music. If there's any band that you liked from the previous 20 years, whether it was the 70s or the 60s or the 80s, and let's face it, you can be from the early 2000s now and be 20 years old. And you know what? All of those bands are putting out amazing music. It may not be their best album. My contrarian pick for best Megadeth album is So Far So Good, So What? Or sometimes Countdown to Extinction, depending on how nihilistic I'm feeling at the time. But, that was a long time ago. But 13's a great album. In Game's a great album. The albums with Kiko Loureiro, and I'm just saying that name so fast because I have no skill Brazilian pronunciation. Hope he's not. Oh, he's not watching. What do I care? But in any case, Megadeth put out great albums. Deep Purple, I love the entire Steve Morse catalog. Like we said, Alice Cooper put out great albums. The fact is, these legacy artists, the ones that haven't simply ceased operation, are putting out great music. There is so much great music. And I don't understand when people are like, now, mind you, I'm talking about us. I'm talking about hardcore music fans. Because the average person really stops listening, or their musical taste stop developing right after they get out of high school because they get busy doing other stuff and they never develop new stuff. Our kind of peer group, we don't do that, right? We're music fanatics. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on this panel. You wouldn't be watching these videos. And I will hear those people saying, I stopped listening to that band years ago. And I'm like, why? They're still putting out great albums. You know what? The Who put out an album in 2019. No one saw that coming. It's not their best album, but it's worth listening to. It's got a couple of good songs on it. So go get just whatever legacy band you love. I guarantee Uriah Heep's putting out music still. Black Sabbath is sadly no longer putting out music after 13. But you can still get music from so many groups. If you liked it, if there's a band you like from the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, the Smiths haven't put out an album in 40 years, but Johnny Marr is still making amazing music. You can find music from your legacy artists that are putting out now. I'm talking in the 2020s, maybe the 2010s at the latest. And if you liked them then, you will almost certainly like something about it now. So I urge everybody, go out and support your legacy acts. If there's albums you're missing from their catalog, go pick them up. And there's almost certainly something that you're going to like.
Big time, yeah. Lots of great stuff we all know the law or the unwritten rule. I hear that all the time. Only their early stuff is good. I'm like, there's so much more to a band than just their early stuff. That's just me there.
Yeah. Well, that's we're the Contrarians, so we're gonna take the path not well traveled. But I'm just going to urge you, go out and get some music by your legacy bands. Try something that you haven't found. I'm still working my way through Uriah Heep's catalog because it's enormous. There's music that'll last me years and years and years. So everybody, thank you very much for spending your time with us watching this video. I hate saying the YouTube things, but, like, subscribe, share the video, all those good things. There's a Patreon, all that kind of stuff will be in the linked below. And thank you very much. David, Dan, thank you for spending the afternoon talking legacy bands. And we'll see everybody real soon on the Contrarians.
Take care.
Thanks, gentlemen.